I am here today to talk about the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth I. The great poet, dramatist and philosopher Francis Bacon said, "It is an immense ocean that surrounds the island of truth." And if we turn to the play Hamlet, we find, "If circumstances lead me, I will find where truth is hid, though it were hid indeed within the centre." And on the title page of Bacon's New Atlantis, he tells us himself that, in time, the hidden truth will be revealed. The mysterious portrait, part of the royal collection which now hangs in the Haunted Gallery at Hampton Court Palace, had previously been hidden away from public view for centuries, only receiving passing comment from an elite cabal of art authorities and a curious silence by its current custodians. Stimulated by an article by Sir Roy Strong, the renowned authority on Elizabethan art, in his essay "My Weeping Stag I Crown, the Persian Lady Reconsidered," this enigmatic portrait has, in the first 2 decades of our own 21st century, finally been placed under the analytical microscope of other critics who have approached it from different perspectives, in particular by 2 Oxfordians, Dr. Paul Altrocci in his article "The Queen Elizabeth Pregnancy Portrait, Who Designed It and Who Did the Cover-Ups," expanded upon in "The Virgin Queen's Mysterious Abdominal Swelling," and David Shakespeare in his long and detailed examination of it in "The Pregnancy Portrait of Elizabeth I," as well as attracting the attention of a full-length book written in German by Professor Hildegard Hammerschmidt-Hummel, entitled "The Secret Surrounding Shakespeare's Dark Lady, Uncovering a Mystery." The 3 most recent independent investigators, Dr. Altrocci, David Shakespeare and Francis Carr, into the identity of the sitter of this very special portrait by Gerhardts, all identify her as a pregnant Queen Elizabeth. The royal custodians of this portrait have for several centuries kept it hidden from public view in a series of royal palaces, and the secrecy surrounding it continues to the present day. In their inquiries, Francis Carr, David Shakespeare and Dr. Altrocci have met with a very strange reaction or silence from the custodians of the most important Elizabethan painting of the era, which contains a series of intertwined secrets of the greatest historical importance. In his brief article, "The Mystery Painting at Hampton Court," Francis Carr relates the experience of his inquiries. At Hampton Court, some of the Queen's 7,000 paintings are on display. Some of them are reproduced in illustrated guidebooks and on postcards. One large portrait, however, guards its secret history. At the time of his visit, he tells us there was no reproduction of it available, and no one there could give him any information, adding, "What makes the refusal of the palace to divulge any further details all the more strange is the unique nature of the painting itself. Not only is it crammed with obviously significant symbolic details, but the woman is pregnant." Something similar happened to David Shakespeare when he visited Hampton Court to research his extensive 92-page thesis, "The Pregnancy Portrait of Elizabeth I," which provides the closest examination of the painting itself to date. He says that after viewing the painting, he made several unsuccessful attempts to contact the curator of pictures at Hampton Court Palace concerning any records kept of the work done to the painting. Met with a stony silence, he decided to conduct his own study. Dr. Altrocci had no doubt whatsoever that the establishment had been involved in a long-standing conspiracy and cover-up, with highly respected authorities involved in an enormous deception practiced against the world at large through a programme of deliberate misinformation, falsehood and lies relating to the truth about the so-called Virgin Queen, which he suggests is related to the authorship of the Shakespeare works. It is puzzling, he says, why royal art experts have created a campaign of misinformation by claiming that the identity of the pregnant lady is unknown. Are they deliberately trying to avoid the truth? If so, why? Is there some relationship to the Shakespeare authorship hoax which still involves an active cover-up? The simply extraordinary reason for this, according to Charles Beauclerk, which would be difficult to overstate, is that the profound truths encoded within this portrait would demand a complete rewriting of Elizabeth history. Little wonder, he says, such strenuous attempts have been made over the centuries to alter, rename, camouflage, and generally disguise the portrait, as in this single image the whole official version of Elizabethan history comes crashing to the ground. What I'm going to do in the video is provide a brief description of the painting, give a short account of the history of the painting, look at the painting and its symbolism in some detail, briefly highlight some of the references and allusions to Queen Elizabeth in the Shakespeare poems and plays. For the first time, we will discuss the extensive links between the portrait of Elizabeth and a wide range of Shakespeare poems and plays. We can then move on to reveal the identity of the secret author of its 3 Latin mottos and the Shakespearean sonnet in the cartouche and the secret cipher incorporated within it. We'll reveal the identity of the person who commissioned the painting, reveal the identity of the child being carried by Queen Elizabeth in the portrait, and provide a detailed history of the relationship of Queen Elizabeth and her secret husband Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, and the concealed royal birth of their son, known to the world as Francis Bacon, and a second son, known to the world as Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex. Furthermore, in addition to a large number of paintings, facsimiles and illustrations in the video, I will in particular reproduce the outer cover of the Northumberland Manuscript, which was Bacon's collection of manuscripts held at Alnwick Castle, Northumberland. These had the names of Francis Bacon and his pseudonym William Shakespeare scribbled across it, and once contained his 2 Shakespeare plays, Richard II and Richard III. Also extracts from the earliest biography of Bacon by Pierre Ambios, revealing and confirming he was the son of Queen Elizabeth. Also a portrait of Francis Bacon as a very small child, 1 to 2 years old, with a double chain hanging from his neck, with a miniature possibly depicting Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, with the smaller one concealing an image of Queen Elizabeth. Also a portrait of Queen Elizabeth and her son by Nicholas Hilliard. What is known as the Vestal Flame portrait of Queen Elizabeth, depicting 2 children representing Francis Tudor Bacon and Robert Tudor Devereux. Queen Elizabeth, Robert Dudley and Francis Bacon, all miniatures by Nicholas Hilliard, a triptych clearly indicating they were mother, father and son. And finally a portrait by Paul van Sommer of Francis Bacon, in which he is pointing with his cane to the Crown of England in his attire. The enigmatic portrait depicts a pregnant Queen Elizabeth in an extraordinary gown embroidered with branches of foliage, incorporating into its design various symbolic birds and flowers. She is wearing a curious headdress with a veil extending down her back, standing beneath a large walnut tree bearing its fruit with a stream receding into the distance. Her right hand crowns a weeping stag with a circle of pansies. 3 enigmatic Latin mottos are placed down the trunk of the tree, and in the bottom right-hand corner of the picture stands an elaborate cartouche with a special sonnet whose anonymous authorship has never been established. It is also not known who secretly commissioned this allegorical painting of Queen Elizabeth, which will be revealed and confirmed here for the first time, and its coded complex imagery and symbolism properly contextualised, decoded and deciphered. On the grounds of its draftsmanship and style, the painting is now recognised to be the work of Marcus Geerhards the Younger, and shares many similarities with his famous Ditchley portrait of Queen Elizabeth, with its similar cartouche and identical calligraphy. This famous Ditchley portrait of Queen Elizabeth by Marcus Geerhards the Younger is housed in the National Portrait Gallery. When the Ditchley portrait is placed alongside the pregnancy portrait, the similarities between the two paintings are only all too clear to see. Dr. Altrocci dates the portrait between 1594 and 1604, presumably determined by the death of the Earl of Oxford in 1604, whereas Sir Roy Strong narrows it down to around 1600–1601, which fits rather nicely with his arguments linking Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex, to the painting. The early whereabouts of the portrait remain unknown or uncertain. In 1613, the Duke of Saxe-Weimar saw a portrait of what he described as a beautiful Turkish lady at Somerset House, but whether this was the portrait by Gerhardt of a Persian lady or Elizabeth in a Persian dress is open to doubt and cannot now be determined. Both Dr. Altrocci and David Shakespeare speculate the portrait was lost to the royal family sometime during the Civil War following the beheading of Charles I in 1649. However this may be, the earliest specific reference to the painting is found in the notebooks of the antiquary George Virtue. He saw the painting around 1728, describing it as a picture belonging to the crown of Queen Elizabeth. A few years later, in 1735, he records that Sir John Stanley some time ago recovered the picture of Queen Elizabeth in a strange, fantastic habit, while he was deputy to Queen Anne, from a market in Moorfields that had the mark of Charles I on the back of it, which has since been removed. In the reign of Queen Anne I, the portrait was recorded at St James's Palace as Queen Elizabeth in fancy dress. It was later removed by Queen Caroline, wife of King George II, to Kensington Palace. It resided there for more than a century. It is described by W. H. Pine in his chapter dedicated to Kensington Palace as a portrait of Queen Elizabeth in a fantastic Asiatic dress, seemingly of the Persian character. It was similarly noticed by Horace Walpole in the Gallery of the Royal Personages, which he described as a picture of Elizabeth in a fantastic habit, something like a Persian, drawn in a forest, a stag behind her, and three mottos and verses, which, as we know not on what occasion the piece was painted, are not easily to be interpreted. The painting was moved by Queen Victoria to Hampton Court Palace in 1838, where it now remains, described by Ernest Law, the official historian at Hampton Court Palace and acclaimed expert on Tudor history, as Queen Elizabeth in a fanciful dress. This curious picture, he says, with its fantastical design, enigmatical mottos and quaint verses, doubtless had some allegorical meaning which we are now unable to interpret. Up to this point, for several hundred years, the painting had hung in royal palaces as a portrait of Queen Elizabeth, until sometime in the 20th century something rather remarkable occurred, when its label at Hampton Court Palace was without explanation changed to a portrait of an unknown woman. With the portrait of Elizabeth rendered officially anonymous, there have been a number of attempts to identify or label her as someone else, none of which need detain us. The three most recent investigators, Francis Carr, Dr. Altrocci and David Shakespeare, all rightly identify the portrait as a pregnant Queen Elizabeth. The world-renowned Elizabethan art critic Sir Roy Strong initially identified the sitter in the portrait as Elizabeth, with the Earl of Essex as the transmuted stag Actaeon. Sir Roy says, "I think that I've solved the Persian virgin crowning a weeping stag. It is so obvious. The stag is Essex as the transmuted Actaeon, and that everything I touched fell into place. The regal pansies, the walnut, a royal tree. We are looking at the weeping Essex still protesting love and loyalty to the Queen." Then, in a matter of months, in his 1993 article, Sir Roy argued Sir Henry Lee had commissioned the portrait of Lady Frances Woolsingham, who he now claimed to be the sitter in the portrait, widow of Sir Philip Sidney and wife of Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex, as part of a plan to rehabilitate Essex in the eyes of Elizabeth. Sir Royce said, "Could we be looking at some sort of extraordinary penitential picture devised by Lee of Lady Essex in the autumn of 1600? She stands declaring her loyalty and that of her disgraced husband to the Queen in the two headdresses of her virgin flowers. The loose robe would have suited the Countess's enceinte condition at the close of 1600, for the last child, Dorothy, was born early in December. This is by no means the last word to be written on this amazing portrait. One day further scholarship will uncover more, but I have no doubt that its context, if not its eventual identity, will remain the same." His suggestion the woman in the portrait was Lady Essex has not been well received. David Shakespeare rightly points out that the striking symbolism of the painting is not consistent with her known life, nor does the sentiment and content of the sonnet seem relevant to Lady Essex, and he tellingly asks, why indeed would she be crowning her husband? This is a view confirmed by Alison Sorby. In 1992, Strong proposed that she could be Frances Woolsingham, widow of Sir Philip Sidney and wife of the ill-fated Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, and suggested that the purpose of the elaborate portrait might have been to encourage clemency on the part of the Queen towards Essex, who stood accused of treasonous ambition. It is difficult, however, to imagine the logic that would have the weeping stag, a possible metaphor for Essex as Strong postulates, being crowned in the image when this is just what he is being punished for, his attempted assumption of the throne of England. In addition, the contemporary portraits of Lady Essex, which Strong asserts are perfectly compatible, do not actually confirm a resemblance with the Persian lady. The modern scholars that have examined, analysed and discussed this very special portrait are all of a mind regarding its historical importance, its symbolic complexity, and the fact it contains a number of different coded messages. The widely recognised authority on Elizabethan paintings and portraiture, Sir Royce Strong, rightly observes that, without doubt, we are looking at perhaps the most complicated of all Elizabethan allegorical portraits, as complex as any of the Queen herself. There can be no doubt, he states, that we find ourselves in a presence which can certainly be described as something more than remarkable, and such a picture cannot have been conceived as anything other than a major statement. Something similar is said by Alison Sorby. Evidently, there are various messages conveyed in the picture, with many allegorical aspects to it, and in order to identify the subject, it is necessary to decipher its complex imagery. It is, Sorby adds, an emblem portrait, and she believes, along with Sir Royce Strong and Michael Bath, that the entire painting has been conceived as an emblem, the meaning veiled in a complex conceit. The Oxfordians Dr. Altrocci and David Shakespeare believe the complex painting, which incorporates into its central emblem and symbolism the secret that the so-called pregnant Virgin Queen bore a son as a result of a secret liaison with the Earl of Oxford, whom they believe to be the secret author of the Shakespeare poems and plays, their secret love child being Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton, to whom the Shakespeare poems Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucretia are dedicated. Professor Hildegard Hammerschmidt-Hummel believes that the portrait depicted Elizabeth Vernon, wife of Southampton, who she believed was the Dark Lady of the Sonnets, whose menage a trois with her prospective husband and Shakespeare left her with child, and it was Shakespeare that provided the sonnet, this elaborate and emblematic testament to her pregnant state. None of the above authorities or writers once referred to Francis Bacon in relation to the pregnancy portrait, who would no doubt have been highly amused by their errors and confusion, his favourite twin themes regarding the fallibility of the human mind. Let us now turn our attention to the robe itself. The striking and remarkable robe worn by Queen Elizabeth in the portrait, which is usually described as Persian, is embroidered with interconnected motifs and symbols consisting of birds, snails, leaves, grapes, honeysuckle and red roses. The symbol of the red rose was regularly incorporated into portraits of Queen Elizabeth. The Tudor rose symboled the united red rose of Lancaster with the white rose of York and was adopted as the national emblem of England. Seen in the design of the robe are 3 phoenixes, the mythical bird which never dies, but after every 400 years is consumed by fire and born again, making it a symbol of resurrection and rebirth. These 3 phoenixes immediately bring to mind the famous painting of Elizabeth known as the Phoenix Portrait, after the prominent phoenix jewel worn on her chest, painted as a pair with the pelican portrait attributed to Nicholas Hilliard. This was just before he travelled to France, where he painted in miniature a young Francis Bacon. These famous portraits are 2 of the most recognisable paintings of Queen Elizabeth in all her royal splendour, associated with the twin emblems of the phoenix and the pelican. Here is an engraving of Queen Elizabeth underneath a phoenix rising from the flames of the pyre. Let us now also look at the honeysuckle and grapes on the robe. The honeysuckle represents devotion and love, with the grapes symbolising blessed fertility, pointing to the ability to conceive and produce children. In addition, David Shakespeare identifies another curious image which occurs at least 7 times in the pattern of the robe. It is striped with gold and green with a red section along one side that appears to represent a fig which is splitting to expose its centre. Interestingly, in Greco-Roman culture, he tells us, the fig is associated with female genitalia and fertility. The Greek word for fig is the same word for vulva. And if we focus in on the design in the region of the 2 rings on the robe, David Shakespeare observes that the scroll frames the elements and links the rings with tongues like leaves. Does this indicate a spoken oath of commitment between 2 people? At the centre are 2 figs, both splitting open. As symbols of fertility, does this signify the birth of 2 offspring? Could it be interpreted in any other way? I rather think not. The figs on the robe associated with female vulva and fertility, Elizabeth's vulva and fertility, framed within the 2 rings, as we shall see, symbolising the oath spoken at the secret marriage of Elizabeth and Leicester, splitting open, signifying the birth of 2 offspring, Francis Bacon Tudor and Robert Devereux Tudor, Earl of Essex, are a symbolic echo of several references and allusions in the first Shakespeare poem, Venus and Adonis, first printed in 1593. As all Shakespeare scholars and the rest of the Shakespeare world knows, Venus and Adonis is dedicated to Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton. What is not well known is that prior to the dedication prefixed to the Shakespeare poem Venus and Adonis, Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton, resided with Francis Bacon at Gray's Inn, where Southampton was admitted on the 6th of June 1588. Southampton was reputed to be the most beautiful young man in the kingdom and was only all too happy to flaunt his bisexuality. During his time at Gray's Inn, he had an affair with Bacon, which was still continuing when Bacon dedicated Venus and Adonis to Southampton. This later portrait by Nicholas Hilliard of the Earl of Southampton also captures his youthful beauty and his ambiguous sexuality. Due to the feminine appearance of the sitter, the first painting was originally believed to be a portrait of a woman. This has now been identified as the earliest known portrait of an androgynous-looking Earl of Southampton, showing him around the time his lover Bacon dedicated his Shakespeare poem Venus and Adonis to him. The narrative poem Venus and Adonis, published in 1593, marks the first appearance in print of the name, or more accurately the pseudonym, William Shakespeare, which is printed below the dedication to the Earl of Southampton, above which stands Bacon's enigmatic AA headpiece. The poem of Venus and Adonis has also often been associated with Queen Elizabeth. Dr. Anne Whitlock, the recognised authority on Queen Elizabeth and the Elizabethan period, writes, "From around the 1590s until the end of Elizabeth's reign, satirists would often refer to the vulva in terms of a metaphorical space, describing it in sensual detail as smooth, soft and moist and a place of delicious, intoxicating tastes. Such sexually explicit descriptions of the Queen's genitalia in some late Elizabethan verse suggest a rejection of the Queen's self-styled cult of virginity. In Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis, Venus is the sexual aggressor, and it is she who dominates her lover Adonis and is consumed with sexual excitement. Dr. Hannah Betts points out that Venus, the goddess of love, in her attempted seduction of Adonis, a very handsome young man who would rather go hunting, is emphatically non-virginal. In the poem, Venus likens Adonis to a deer, which reminds us of the stag, the male deer in the pregnancy portrait. I'll be a park and thou shalt be my deer. Feed where thou wilt on mountain or in dale. Graze on my lips, and if those hills be dry, stray lower where the pleasant fountains lie. After quoting the above lines, Dr. Hannah Betts says, Shakespeare's insatiate queen directs the reader's attention to areas of her body that offer unambiguously sexual forms of sufferance, in particular, her vagina. The figure of Queen Elizabeth in her Persian robe is standing beneath a walnut tree, known as a Persian walnut, which in Elizabethan times was referred to as a royal tree. The royal walnut tree is a symbol of knowledge and wisdom, these being the subjects of Bacon's Advancement of Learning and the Wisdom of the Ancients. On the branches of the tree, Sir Roy Strong points out that at the top to the right there are two small birds with peachy pink breasts, namely chaffinches, which David Shakespeare believes may signify two young men. With photographic enhancement, David Shakespeare has also identified a songbird perched on a branch, signifying a songbird in a sole Arabian tree that is of some very special importance. In 1601, for some about the date of the portrait, a long allegorical poem was issued by a little-known Robert Chester entitled Love's Martyr, together with a collection of shorter poems by other poets, including the Shakespeare poem called The Phoenix and the Turtle. Its first four lines reads as follows. Let the bird of loudest lay on the sole Arabian tree, herald sad and trumpet be, to whose sound chaste wings obey. The 67-line allegorical Shakespeare poem tells the story of a mystical love between two birds, the turtle, a symbol of fidelity, and the mythical phoenix, emblem of immortality. The poem mourns the death of the phoenix and the turtle, and its theme of the mutual flame explores the complexity of the mystical union of the two dead birds. It is the most obscure of the Shakespeare poems, and as Dr. Hackett argues, it incites deciphering, with many attempting to decode the allegory via references to historical figures. The phoenix is usually interpreted to represent Queen Elizabeth, and numerous scholars believe the poem alludes to the relationship between Elizabeth and the Earl of Essex, and the events that lie behind the Essex Rebellion and his execution in 1601. Or the turtle may partly shadow Robert Dudley, with whom Elizabeth had two royal sons. Some scholars have interpreted the child given birth to by the phoenix, a new phoenix, as a reference to Elizabeth's heir James I, which of course is clearly wrong as Elizabeth was alive in 1601. In the poem, the phoenix represents Elizabeth and her heir. In its threnos, Bacon laments that she leaves no open posterity, meaning himself her concealed child and unacknowledged heir to the throne of England. Beauty, truth and rarity, grace in all simplicity, here enclosed in cinders lie. Death is now the phoenix nest, and the turtle's loyal breast to eternity does rest. Leaving no posterity, 'twas not their infirmity, it was married chastity. In the climax to the closing scene of his Shakespeare play Henry VIII, Bacon puts in the mouth of Cranmer a great speech in which he prophesies that the baby Princess Elizabeth, although described as a maiden phoenix, shall leave behind her a son and heir. The speech doubles as a veiled record of the state secret that the so-called Virgin Queen carried a royal child, as conveyed in the pregnancy portrait at Hampton Court, and gave birth to a concealed heir, Bacon Shakespeare, as great in fame as she was. When the bird of wonder dies, the maiden phoenix, her ashes new create another heir, as great in admiration as herself. So shall she leave her blessedness to one, when heaven shall call her from this cloud of darkness, who from the sacred ashes of her honour shall star-like rise, as great in fame as she was, and so stand fixed, peace, plenty, love, truth, terror, that were the servants to this chosen infant, shall then be his, and like a vine grow to him. Wherever the bright sun of heaven shall shine, his honour and the greatness of his name shall be, and make new nations. He shall flourish, and like a mountain cedar reach his branches to all the plains about him. Our children's children shall see this, and bless heaven. In his magnum opus, The Secret Teachings of the Ages, the American esoteric philosopher Manly P. Hall says the mystical phoenix is the mythological Persian roc, the gigantic mythological bird described in the Arabian Nights, and, as we have seen in the portrait, the phoenix, like Elizabeth, is wearing a Persian robe under a Persian or Arabian tree. The mystical phoenix, Hall reveals, is the most celebrated of the symbolic creatures in the ancient mysteries, used as a cover for the purpose, he says, of concealing the great truths of esoteric philosophy, and he may well have added history too. He also states that the eagle on the Great Seal of the United States of America is a disguised phoenix. In the revealing maiden phoenix passage in Henry VIII, speaking of himself as heir of the so-called Virgin Queen, Bacon states he will make new nations in reference to Virginia, named after the Virgin Queen, site of the first permanent settlement in North America, which became the United States of America. Her son, Francis Bacon, founding father of the United States of America. Let us now return to the pregnancy portrait. Down the trunk of the Persian tree, linked to the Arabian tree in the phoenix and the turtle, and cedar tree in Henry VIII that shall spread his branches, under which Queen Elizabeth stands in the pregnancy portrait, appear three important Latin inscriptions. The first of these, In Justi Justa Querela, is translated by Sir Roy Strong as a just complaint of injustice. The middle motto, Mea sic mihi, that Sir Roy Strong translates as Thus to me my, which with Queen Elizabeth standing alongside may mean Thus to me my Queen. Dr. Altrocci presents the following interpretation: Thus what is mine should be mine, namely the Queen. The third motto, which has been damaged and is slightly illegible and, according to Dr. Altrocci, intentionally interfered with, has proved problematic in its translation. Sir Roy Strong believed it was Italian, dolor es medicina dolore, grief is medicine for grief, whereas Dr. Altrocci insisted it was entirely in Latin and, when magnified, reads dolor es medicina ettore, which after a very convoluted discussion he concluded could be translated as anguish is part of the healing process for foster parentage. The most probable explanation and translation is provided by David Shakespeare. On closely examining the motto and the current spacing in the lettering, he restored the motto to read dolor es medicina doloris, pain is pain's medicine. This is a quotation from Dionysius Catonis, better known as Cato, in a work entitled Distica de Moribus ad Filium, that translates as words of wisdom for the behaviour of a son. The advice was given in couplet form. When you are wrong, then change your mind. When you are dressing a wound, pain is pain's medicine. In the heart of the portrait, the hand of Queen Elizabeth is stretched out over the head of the weeping stag, who Dr. Altrocci and David Shakespeare have correctly pointed out represents the individual who commissioned the painting, or as Sir Roy Strong puts it, We should not lose sight of the fact that the weeping stag was Actium transmuted. Could we be looking at such a metamorphosed being? Indeed, any appearance of Actium in the guise of a stag presupposes the famous encounter with the goddess Diana and her nymphs bathing. And, as in the case of the pansy, there could only ever be one Diana in late Elizabethan England, the Virgin Queen herself. With every attribute, we seem to move closer and closer into a very rarefied world indeed. That of the Queen and her votaries and their eulogies reach their final cadences in the very last 2 or 3 years of the reign. Dr. Altrocci and David Shakespeare identify the weeping stag as Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, yet according to Sir Roy Strong, around 1600 to 1601, there is only one certain candidate for this role, the fallen Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex. In other words, Sir Roy Strong is certain, and he is right to be, that the true context of the portrait is to be found in the rarefied world of Queen Elizabeth, and the events surrounding her complex relationship with the Earl of Essex, and the events that intensified during the 1590s, leading to his fall and eventual execution on the 25th of February 1601. On Twelfth Night 1601, Sir Roy Strong informs his learned readers a play was presented before Queen Elizabeth with a show, accepted to be a performance of Ben Jonson's Cynthia's Revels, or, as it was also called, The Fountain of Self-Love. The later title and the inclusion of a character named Philautia probably relate to material in the play charged with allusions to the disgraced Essex, because his most celebrated tilt-yard appearance was at Ascension Day 1595, in what his secretary Sir Henry Wotton referred to as his darling piece of love and self-love. At this point, it should be very carefully noted that in his 38-page article, My Weeping Stag I Crowned, the Persian Lady Reconsidered, the most well-known and read account on the subject, Sir Roy Strong does not once mention the name of Francis Bacon in any way whatsoever. This is all the more astonishing considering that during the 1590s, as was known to Strong, the life and biography of Bacon and Essex were so intertwined that full-length works have been written on the subject, and which was also known to Strong, the close and complex relationship which existed between them is central to the first 2 volumes of Spedding's standard work, The Letters and Life of Francis Bacon. I assume the reference to darling piece of love and self-love is unfamiliar to even the most learned of listeners and the implications which flow from it. In a reference tucked away at the back of his article, Sir Roy Strong provides a note directing his readers to one of his earlier works, The Cult of Elizabeth, Elizabethan Portraiture and Pageantry, wherein he sheds a little more light on the matter on the dramatic piece of love and self-love. The only scenario we have for an Essex tilt is that of 1595, which he wrote in collaboration with Francis Bacon, and which Sir Henry Strong, his secretary, referred to as his darling piece of love and self-love. Essex, or to use his tilt pseudonym, Erophilus, was described as poised between love and self-love or Philautia. In the tilt yard, he was wooed by the enchanting orators of Philautia. There were a hermit, a soldier, and a secretary, who attempted to persuade him to adopt one of these 3 courses of life, representing contemplation, experience, and fame, respectively. With the tilting over, the hermit, soldier, and secretary re-entered and reiterated their arguments in interminable speeches by Bacon, after which the squire, on behalf of Essex, spurned them in favour of a life of service to the Queen. A marginal note to one of the speeches in Bacon's hand explains that it was the Queen's unkind dealing which may persuade you to self-love. In the notes to the text at the back of his work, Sir Roy Strong provides the following notes regarding the sources of information. It will be immediately apparent that the device referred to by Sir Roy Strong, Love and Self-Love, written by Bacon on behalf of Essex, wherein the ambassadors of Philautia to Erophilus present their arguments to Erophilus' squire before the Queen, presented before Elizabeth as part of the festivities celebrating her accession day, 17th of November 1595, is partly found in Spedding's Standard Letters and Life of Francis Bacon and the so-called Northumberland Manuscript. The Northumberland Manuscript is the most important of all the contemporary documents of the Elizabethan period which is linked to the authorship of the Shakespeare works, and should simply be known for what it is, namely Bacon's own collection of manuscripts, parts of which had been removed or lost in a fire before it was made known to the world. In its present state, the Northumberland Manuscript consists of a much scribbled outer cover and a number of works in manuscript written by Bacon, including Of Tribute or Giving That What Is Due, written by Bacon, most probably to be presented by the Earl of Essex as part of the celebration for Elizabeth's Accession Day in 1592. And, as referred to above, Of Love and Self-Love, written by Bacon on behalf of Essex, presented before Queen Elizabeth as part of the celebrating marking her Accession Day, 17th of November, 1595. Also, a speech for the Earl of Sussex at the Tilt addressed to Queen Elizabeth that was most likely written for the Tilt at Whitehall on 17th of November, 1596. It is also clear from the list of contents found on the outer cover of Bacon's collection of manuscripts that it also contains an address or letter to Queen Elizabeth and a copy of his essays, first printed in 1597, which he dedicated to his brother Anthony Bacon. It also originally held a copy of his 6 speeches which formed part of the magnificent Christmas grazing revels of 1594-5. That saw the first known performance of his Shakespeare play, The Comedy of Errors, and most importantly, it at one time held priceless manuscript copies of his Shakespeare plays, Richard II and Richard III. On the outer cover, containing its list of contents, is a large mass of scribbled writings of the utmost importance and significance to the authorship of the Shakespeare works. Down the left side of the page appears a variant of the long word in Love Labour's Lost. Further down appears the line, Revealing day through every cranny peeps, essentially line 1086 of the Rape of Lucretia, revealing day through every cranny spies. Furthermore, this is the only contemporary manuscript where the names of Bacon and Shakespeare appear together. In fact, the name of Bacon, Francis Bacon, and his pseudonym, Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, have been scribbled across its outer cover on more than a dozen occasions. In particular, above the entry for the Shakespeare play Richard II appears the entry by Mr. Francis William Shakespeare, and further down the page the word your is twice written across his pseudonym William Shakespeare, so it reads Your William Shakespeare. The manuscript should be the most famous document relating to the authorship of the Shakespeare poems and plays in the world, and known to all and sundry in every corner of the literary globe. The reason why this is not the case is since the time of its discovery, the orthodox Shakespeare authorities and Shakespeare biographers and editors have systematically suppressed or misrepresented it. Although for some reason Sir Roy Strong did not wish to draw to the attention of his readers the outer cover and original contents of the Northumberland Manuscript, or Bacon's collection of manuscripts, not least the Shakespeare plays Richard II and Richard III, at least we are now more able to appreciate fully its relation to the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. The Northumberland Manuscript, or Bacon's collection of manuscripts, dates no later than 1597, not least because his essays once contained within it were first printed in 1597 with a dedication to his brother Anthony Bacon. The date of Bacon's Northumberland Manuscript, originally housing his Shakespeare plays Richard II and Richard III, is of critical importance. The name of Shakespeare did not appear on a title page until 1598 with Love's Labour's Lost, from which a variant of its long word is scribbled on the outer cover of the Northumberland Manuscript, beneath which appears a line from the Rape of Lucretia. Like Venus and Adonis, the second Shakespeare narrative poem, The Rape of Lucretia, is an erotic narrative based on Ovid's Fasti and aspects of his metamorphosis, from which the theme of the transmuted stag Actaeon is taken in the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. In 1594, the beautiful Earl of Southampton is the talk of the town and the most ardent follower of the Earl of Essex, and his love affair with Francis Bacon is known to the most trusted members of the Bacon-Essex circle. As with Venus and Adonis, Bacon dedicates the Rape of Lucretia to his lover, pointing to their deep intimacy, with his love for him breathing through every line. The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end. What I have done is yours, what I have to do is yours, being part in all I have, devoted yours. As I am just about to show you, Francis Bacon had various ways of signing his Shakespeare poems and plays, an occult way of writing using various different devices and secret signatures, as well as employing various cipher systems. It will be seen that on the first page of the first 1594 edition of The Rape of Lucretia, the first two lines begin with a very large capital F, stretching downwards across the first two lines, incorporating the capital letters R and B. Thus, the poem commences with the initials of FRB for Francis Bacon. The two lines contain 67 letters, Francis in simple cipher. The two verses contain 51 words each, so 51 and 51 is 102, plus the signature B at the bottom of the page. 102 plus 1 is 103, which is Shakespeare in simple cipher. Later, I will give an explanation of Bacon's simple cipher in relation to the Shakespeare sonnet in the pregnancy portrait. Let us now turn to the last page of the 1594 edition of The Rape of Lucretia. Now focus your attention on the last two lines of the poem. The Romans plausibly did give consent to Tarquin's everlasting banishment. Now if we draw a line from the F of Finney through the last two lines of the verse, as shown in the illustration, we get F Bacon. Thus Bacon signs the beginning and the end of his Shakespeare poem, The Rape of Lucretia. The two Shakespeare narrative poems, Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucretia, are companion pieces which, beyond their dedication to Southampton, share themes relating to Queen Elizabeth. As we know, Venus is identified with Elizabeth, who uses her sexuality and virginity as a political ploy on the national and international stage. She was playing a part. As our poet so famously said, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players, in As You Like It, a play inextricably connected to the pregnancy portrait. The Rape of Lucretia is a political poem in which Lucretia is seen as a paragon of chastity, whose rape results in the end of monarchy, as was Queen Elizabeth, another supposed paragon of chastity or virginity, whose monarchy was, at the time of the publication of the poem, also coming to an end. It could be said that her very life and throne depended upon the myth and lie of her virginity, a subject on which Charles Beauclerk in Shakespeare's Lost Kingdom, The True History of Shakespeare and Elizabeth, did not mince his words. If we see the shadow of Queen Elizabeth behind the figure of Lucretia, then lust and ambition become inseparable. After all, with the Virgin Queen on the throne, how else could a man become king but through sexual conquest? Rape in this context was tantamount to staging a coup. Moreover, the piercing of the Virgin's veil or exposure of the Queen as a whore, symbolised by the Rape of Lucretia, could lead to the end of Elizabeth's reign, even the end of monarchy itself. It will be recalled that Bacon's manuscript collection, otherwise known as Northumberland Manuscript, containing a number of letters and dramatic devices written on behalf of Essex addressed to Elizabeth, which held copies of the two Shakespeare plays Richard II and Richard III, dates no later than 1597. The tragedy of Richard II was entered on the Stationers' Register on the 29th of August 1597, and 2 months later the tragedy of King Richard III on 20th of October. The two plays were first printed anonymously in quarto editions in 1597, both of which were printed by Valentine Sims for Andrew Wise. With its villainous titular character Richard III modelled upon the characteristics and physical appearance of Bacon's cousin, the crooked hunchback and devious politician Sir Robert Cecil, the individual that many of Bacon's editors of his essays have repeatedly pointed out, he was also alluding to in his essay of deformity. The play Richard II was used by Bacon to draw analogies between Richard II, who notoriously indulged his favourites, and Elizabeth's reliance upon favourites like Sir Robert Cecil, which created a dangerous rivalry at court with the Earl of Essex, whose supporters, the day before his ill-fated rebellion against Elizabeth, commissioned a performance of it. Now let us take a closer look at the title page. The first thing to notice is how the title page has been deliberately formatted. It will be seen that the word second, instead of being printed on the third line, for which there is more than enough space, it is printed across 2 lines, and for a very good reason. The 2 lines above the word Lord begin with the letters B and A, and the first 3 letters of Cond. In the line above provides the second syllable required for Bacon, giving us Lord Bacon, to whom he is known to posterity. If the letter U below is brought into the equation, we might with little difficulty read, by you Lord Bacon, or more fully, the tragedy of King Richard II by you Lord Bacon. Furthermore, the page is divided into 3 sections. It will be noticed that the above section contains 33 letters. 33 is Bacon in simple cipher. Unlike the top section, which is printed in Roman letters, the middle section is printed in italic letters. 78 italic letters to be precise, so 33 and 78 is 111, which is Bacon in K cipher. In the bottom section, there are 104 letters minus the emblem, so 104 minus 1 gives us 103, which is Shakespeare in simple cipher. The whole page contains 215 letters, which minus the 4 digits in the date is 211, which is a split, double, simple and K cipher for Francis Bacon, 100, and Bacon, 111. The first 1598 edition of Love's Labour's Lost is the earliest play to carry the name, or more accurately the pseudonym, of William Shakespeare on its title page. The play is set in Navarre, whose king was Henry of Navarre, and it clearly alludes to the historical French court. In the play, King Ferdinand, King Henry of Navarre, and 3 of his friends vow to devote the next 3 years to the study of philosophy and forgo the company of women. They have, however, forgotten the arrival of a diplomatic mission of the Princess of France with 3 of her ladies. The names of King Ferdinand's friends are Byron, Dumaine and Longueville, 3 leading historical figures in contemporary France. Francis Bacon spent 3 years in France, and his elder brother Anthony Bacon spent 12 years on the continent working for the English Secret Service on behalf of Queen Elizabeth and her government. Some of his time in France was spent at the court of Henry of Navarre, who was a very close friend and regular correspondent. There survives at the British Library passports of Anthony Bacon and his train, signed by Byron, Dumaine, Longueville, the 3 lords attending on the king in Love's Labour's Lost, and Boyes, that is Boyet, one of 3 lords attending on the Princess of France in the play, who has frequently been identified with Queen Elizabeth. That these 4 historical names on the passports of Anthony Bacon and his train are the same as the 4 characters in Love's Labour's Lost is never mentioned by Shakespeare scholars. Nor do they draw attention to the significance of the names of two other characters in the play, namely Anthony Dull, having the same Christian name as Bacon's brother Anthony, and Sir Nathaniel, a curate, the same Christian name of Bacon's elder half-brother, Sir Nathaniel Bacon. The play Love's Labour's Lost is renowned for its highly sophisticated use of language and verbal ingenuity, its oblique allusions, English and Latin puns, some understood by the cognoscenti. Let us just take a look at one of them. It will be recalled that the unusual long word appears on the outer cover of Bacon's collection of manuscripts, the Northumberland Manuscript, a variant of the long word in the play. In Act 5, Scene 1, the characters Anthony Dull, or should we say Anthony Bacon, and the curate Sir Nathaniel, or Sir Nathaniel Bacon, enter with the pedant Holofernes, with the latter two discussing Armado's pretensions to linguistic style, when they are interrupted by the arrival of Armado with Costard and Moat. Monsieur, are you not lettered? Yes, yes, he teaches boys the horn book. What is A, B, spelled backward with the horn on his head? The Latin for horn is cornu, thus, in other words, AB spelt backwards with the horn on his head is bacon, phonetically indicative of bacon. Also, many Shakespeare scholars have pointed out that Queen Elizabeth haunts the deer hunting scene in Act 4, Scene 1 of the play, which is discussed in the following scene by Holofernes and Sir Nathaniel in absurd scholastic terms to the consternation of the Constable Anthony, characters named after Sir Nathaniel and Anthony Bacon. In fact, the spectral presence of Queen Elizabeth haunts the whole of the play. In the recent Arden edition of Love's Labour's Lost, its editor, Professor Woolsingham, points to the lines, "O vile, then, as she goes, what upward lies, the street should see as she walked overhead," an allusion to the Ditchley portrait of Queen Elizabeth, which, as we know, shares a similar cartouche with sonnet and identical calligraphy with the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. Professor Woodhusen highlights that, in one of the most famous portraits of Queen Elizabeth, the Ditchley portrait, the Queen stands with her feet near Ditchley in Oxfordshire on a map on southern England, allowing its inhabitants, who are not shown, to see up her dress. And in a footnote to some forlorn and naked hermitage, delivered by the Princess of France, the character in whom Shakespeare scholars see various reflections in Queen Elizabeth, Professor Woodhusen observes, drawing on medieval imagery, Elizabethan courtiers like Sir Henry Lee, during the Queen's visit to Ditchley in 1592, associated withdrawal from the court with becoming the hermit. He might well have added that Bacon's dramatic device written on behalf of the Earl of Essex, of love and self-love, performed before Queen Elizabeth, that commences with the hermit's speech in the presence, in which Bacon praises a life of study and contemplation, the same theme associated by Professor Woodhusen with the Ditchley portrait, twin of the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. Following the death of the spymaster Sir Francis Woolsingham, the headquarters of the English Secret Service was removed to Essex House on the Strand. Here, the Earl of Essex acted as kind of de facto Foreign Secretary, with Francis and Anthony Bacon joint heads of foreign and domestic intelligence. The English Secret Service, as it was then known, eventually evolved into what we now know today as British intelligence, and thus, in modern parlance, Francis and Anthony Bacon were the equivalent joint heads of MI5 and MI6. From their headquarters at Essex House, Francis and Anthony controlled a vast network of spies and intelligencers operating at home in England and all over the continent of Europe. Through its doors came officers of state and government, foreign ambassadors and diplomats, printers and publishers in the pay of Francis and Anthony Bacon, scholars, writers, poets and dramatists, as well as the artist Marcus Gerhardt, painter of the Ditchley and pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. The painter Gerhardt was evidently in the pay of the heads of the English Secret Service, and in the Earl of Essex he had a major champion and patron, and, of course, during this period he painted the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. There are at least 3 surviving paintings of the Earl of Essex by Marcus Gerhardt the Younger, painted somewhere between 1596 and 1599. The prime version of the painting of the Earl of Essex by Gerhardt, now hanging at Woburn Abbey, assumes the air and posture of someone who believes he was born to royalty, qualities captured in the words of Professor Guy. Painted from life in the closing months of 1596, in the portrait Essex affects a regal bearing as if he were himself a king, his head and shoulders leaning slightly forwards and dressed in a white satin doublet and hose, sporting the insignia of the Order of the Garter and clutching his sword. The image is that of a man who felt himself born to greatness and at liberty to ignore Elizabeth's commands. This air, posture and demeanour of royalty depicted in the previous portrait of Essex is further reflected in the slightly later painting of the Earl by the same artist. Furthermore, another not so well-known portrait of Queen Elizabeth was painted by Gerhardt, dated around 1597, possibly commissioned by Essex and Francis Bacon. For his 3 paintings of Essex, he must have before and after visited Essex House on a very regular basis for a number of years, and was no doubt in the secret confidence of Francis Bacon. Now let us return to the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth by Gerhardt. The scholars Sir Roy Strong, Dr. Altrocchi, David Shakespeare and Alison Sorbet and others that have examined and discussed the pregnancy portrait have all briefly highlighted the link between the weeping stag and a passage in the Shakespeare play As You Like It and Ovid's account of Actaeon's metamorphosis into a stag. This, however, scarcely scrapes the surface, as the links between Actaeon and several other Shakespeare plays is extensive and, not that any of the above mention it, Bacon interprets the myth of Actaeon and Pentheus, or curiosity in the wisdom of the ancients, as a fable, obliquely communicating the secrets of princes, just like the secrets of the so-called Virgin Queen in the pregnancy portrait. The myth that pierces to the heart of Shakespeare's relationship with Queen Elizabeth, writes Charles Beauclerk, is the tale of Actaeon, the young hunter who stumbled upon the virgin goddess Diana, goddess of the hunt, associated with fertility and childbirth, bathing nude with her nymphs. To punish Actaeon and prevent him from disclosing what he had seen, she turned him into a stag. In fear, Actaeon flees into the woods, chased by his own hounds, who, seeing him as a stag and failing to recognise who he really is, hunt him down and rip him to pieces. The first Shakespeare poem, Venus and Adonis, is, Beauclerk observes, almost a mirror image of the Actaeon myth, where, like Actaeon, Adonis is hunted to death. This motive of Actaeon's metamorphosis into a stag was a recurring theme from the early Shakespeare plays written throughout the 1590s and beyond, during the period leading up to the date the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth was painted, with its own weeping stag that is central to one of the greatest secrets in Elizabethan history. In the early Shakespeare play Titus Andronicus, Timora's sons, Demetrius and Chiron, argue over Lavinia, whom each desires. The evil Aaron proposes that they both rape her during the forthcoming royal hunt. It is here, in the context of the hunt in the forest, that Bacon directly raises the myth of Diana and Actaeon. Saucy controller of my private steps, had I the power that some say Diane had, thy temples should be planted presently with horns, as was Actaeon's, and the hounds should drive upon thy new transformed limbs, unmannerly intruder as thou art. Jove, shield your husband from his hounds today. 'Tis pity they should take him for a stag. It is not difficult, observes Professor Barkham, to establish that Titania, Queen of the Fairies, is Shakespeare's transformation of Diana, as he borrows her name directly from Ovid's account of Diana and Actaeon, which is also pointed out by the Arden, Oxford and Cambridge editors of the play, and Professor Bate in his full-length work on Ovid and Shakespeare. The range of its associations is expanded upon by Barkham. In his great Ovidian comedy, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare juxtaposes all the profound associations of the Actaeon myth with the comic tradition concerning men who become first spiritually and then physically jackasses. The meeting of Bottom and Titania, it seems to me, is the fullest example in Renaissance literature of the Diana and Actaeon story. Here we find the sublime aspect of the story recreated through comic pathos. In The Merry Wives of Windsor, which contains pointed allusions to Bacon's aunt, Lady Elizabeth Cook Hoby Russell's dispute with her neighbour Richard Lovelace, he again recalls the Actaeon myth, when Pistol warns Ford that Falstaff has designs upon his wife. "Go thou like Actaeon, he with Ringwood at thy heels." In Act 3, Scene 2, Falstaff, when on his way to see Mistress Ford, bumps into her jealous husband, who believes Falstaff is sleeping with Mistress Page and Mistress Ford, who plans to catch Falstaff with his wife, so he can pluck the borrowed veil of modesty from the so-seeming Mistress Page, divulge Page himself for a secure and wilful Actaeon. In the final act of the play, Bacon presents a burlesque of the Actaeon myth in connection with the legend of Herne the Hunter, as explained by Professor Stedman. Except for one comic variation, Sir John's obesity, there is a point-by-point correspondence between his disguise as Herne the Hunter and the standard Renaissance picture of Actaeon as a composite figure with stag's head, human body and hunter's clothing. Indeed, to intensify this comic awareness of the Falstaff-Actaeon parallel, Shakespeare allows Sir John to comment on his own metamorphosis into a Windsor stag and the fattest, I think, in the forest. As pointed out by the scholars who examined the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth, the weeping stag scene appears in the second act of As You Like It, the play in which Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, shadows both Duke Senior and Sir Rowland de Boys, where Queen Elizabeth is transmuted into the figure of Rosalind and the Earl of Essex is alluded to repeatedly against a background of Elizabethan iconography and emblems, which in some ways feels like an expansive canvas of the pregnancy portrait, where these figures, emblems and iconography are condensed into a smaller compass. The play was entered in the Stationer's Register on the 4th of August 1600 and is generally believed to have been written and completed around 1600 to 1601. The date, according to Sir Roy Strong, Gerhardt painted the portrait depicting Weeping Stag, here referred to in As You Like It. The melancholy Jakes grieves us that, and in that kind swears you do more usurp than doth your brother that hath banished you. Today my Lord of Amiens and myself did steal behind him as he lay along under an oak, whose antic root peeps out upon the brook that brawls along this wood, to the which place a poor sequestered stag, that from the hunter's aim hath taken a hurt, did come to languish. And indeed, my lord, the wretched animal heaved forth such groans that their discharge did stretch his leathern coat almost to bursting, and the big round tears coursed one another down his innocent nose in piteous chase. And thus the hairy fool, much marked of the melancholy Jakes, stood on the extremest verge of the swift brook, augmenting it with tears. The first quarto of Hamlet was entered in the Stationer's Register on the 26th of July 1602 and appeared in a quarto edition in 1603, the year Queen Elizabeth died on the 24th of March. This first quarto contains only 2,200 lines, with the following passage that also alludes to the weeping stag, as depicted in the pregnancy portrait. What, frighted with false fires? Then let the stricken deer go weep, the heart ungalled play, for some must laugh while some must weep, thus runs the world away. With Queen Elizabeth now safely dead, a much revised and enlarged second quarter of Hamlet appeared in 1604 with around 3,800 lines, to which Bacon added a few more lines to the above passage, which unmistakably and directly alludes to the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. In addition to the obvious allusion to the weeping stag, it also pointedly alludes to the Persian-Turkish headdress, i.e. the forest of feathers, as pointed out in the Arden edition of Hamlet, as extravagantly plumed hats worn by Elizabeth, and also her remarkable shoes with their rare jewels set in gold, appearing in the shape of raised roses. Why, let the stricken deer go weep, the heart ungalled play, for some must watch while some must sleep, thus runs the world away. Would not this, sir, and a forest of feathers, if the rest of my fortunes turn Turk with me, with provincial roses on my raised shoes, get me a fellowship in a cry of players? It has been often said that the robe in the portrait of what Sir Roy Strong titles the Persian lady appears more Turkish than Persian. Modern-day Turkey was one time part of the Persian Empire. And this is how David Shakespeare, who overlooks the passage in Hamlet, describes the strikingly fabulous shoes in the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. These must be very special shoes indeed. The artist has had to perch his subject on a considerable slope in order to display them, while at the same time giving the impression of a full-length robe. The shoes are adorned with blue pearls, the rarest of all, and the fact that they are all the same shade of blue must have made them even more valuable. There are 3 further pearls on each shoe, which have a slight pink colour and are set in gold to form roses. A large ruby is set in front of each ankle, and the shoe fabric is adorned with gold thread. Incidentally, a rose pattern appears in the lacework along the bottom of the robe. Elements of the costume would appear to be Turkish rather than Persian, and this would fit very well with the facts. I would like to take the opportunity to show a very rare and important engraving of Francis Bacon with his hand on the figure of an actor, his mask, William Shakespeare, holding in his left hand a closed book, namely the Shakespeare works, with, of course, his immortal play Hamlet with its striking allusions to the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. The famous tragedy of Hamlet, a complex portrait of Bacon and his relationship with Queen Elizabeth as Gertrude, must be the most scrutinised play of all time, with literally hundreds and thousands of essays, articles, chapters, books and editions being produced on the play. Here below is something that is not found in any of them. The first line prior to the commencement of the play has the pregnant stage direction, "Enter Bernardo and Francisco, 2 sentinels," followed by Bernardo asking Francisco the profoundly meaningful question in the first line of the play, "Who's there?" To which I am now about to reveal the secret hidden answer. Francisco is the Spanish and Portuguese form of the masculine name Franciscus that corresponds to the English name Francis, who is entered in the baptismal register at St. Martin's in the Field as Franciscus Bacon. The name of the one sentinel, Francisco, Francis, alongside the chosen name of the other sentinel, Bernardo, Bernard or Bernard in English, is doubly significant. The 2 names placed together as Francis Bernard have the same initials of Francis Bacon, as well as phonetically suggesting his name. The names Francisco and Bernardo also contain an anagram of Francis Bacon. So, in answer to the profound question, "Who's there?" the answer is Francis Bacon, secret concealed author of Hamlet. In the Shakespeare plays, Bacon fused Ovidian myths in theme and characterisation, which brilliantly drove the narrative and dialogue to great dramatic effect, a case in point being Twelfth Night, a play about secrecy, the deciphering and decoding of texts, and the self-delusion of narcissism. The play is dominated by Malvolio, who is based upon Bacon's cousin, Sir Thomas posthumously Hoby, son of his aunt Lady Elizabeth Cook Hoby, younger sister of his mother Lady Bacon. And it will be recalled one of its characters is named Antonio, the Christian name of his brother Anthony Bacon. Malvolio is initially identified with Narcissus when Olivia describes him as being sick of self-love, a description sometimes hurled at the Earl of Essex and reminiscent of the title of the device Of Love and Self-Love, written by Bacon for Essex, presented before Elizabeth on the 17th of November 1595. The opening narcissistic speech by Orsino, which sets the tone and the theme of the play, is immediately followed by Orsino's Actian sequence, or the allusion to the Actian myth. The play, as pointed out by Professor Bate, is to a large extent framed by the two themes drawn from Ovid of the Actian myth and the shallowness of narcissism. So it is that certain myths form the Cadmean section of the metamorphosis, in particular those of Actian and of Narcissus, which are among the controlling structures of the play. This fused theme of narcissism and the Actian myth, observes Professor Larac, repeats the motive of Actian's metamorphosis in a burlesque mode with the trapping and baiting of Malvolio, who, in his lust, dwells on the prospect of Olivia naked in his daybed, and she has been associated with Diana when first referred to in the play. Malvolio is here being transformed into an Actian by his very dress. Deluded and mocked, he clearly becomes a preposterous Actian who is being watched and preyed upon by the comic group that has persistently and viciously kept dogging him. This fusion of themes and imagery, narcissism and the Actian myth, is not just confined to the character of Malvolio, but is also present in the dual character traits of Orsino. The complexity of these themes is impressively unravelled by Professor Bate. If the noble Orsino is to be read as Actian in that he is hunted by the dogs of his own desires, the steward may be viewed in terms of the myth's implication that it is dangerous to lift one's eyes above one's rank. In the box tree scene, instead of seeing Actian spying on Diana, we watch an Actian figure being spied on himself as he fantasises about his Diana's desire for him. As Malvolio interprets the meaning of the I in the letter, Fabian remarks, "Ay, and you had any eye behind you, you might see more detraction at your heels than fortunes before you." The pun concentrates the double identity of Malvolio as Narcissus, the self-obsessed I, and Actian, the desiring I. In his Shakespeare in Ovid, Professor Bate emphasised Shakespeare's particular interest in the Actian story, and similarly, Professor Larac states Shakespeare was much taken by it, adding, "It is indeed intriguing that for Shakespeare, Actian represents a mysterious crux which needs to be decoded." The Ovidian Actian myth absorbed into the fabric of Titus Andronicus, A Midsummer Night's Dream, As You Like It, The Merry Wives of Windsor, Twelfth Night, and Hamlet is interpreted by Bacon in his fable Actian and Pentheus, or Curiosity in the Wisdom of the Ancients, which is about the discovery of secrets, that is, the secrets concealed by kings and queens, such as the great secrets concealed in the pregnancy portrait. Actian and Pentheus, or Curiosity. The curiosity and unhealthy appetite of man for the discovery of secrets is reproved by the ancients in two examples, one of Actian, the other of Pentheus. Actian, having unawares and by chance seen Diana naked, was turned into a stag and worried by his own dogs. The first of these fables seems to relate to the secrets of princes, the other to the secrets of divinity. For whoever becomes acquainted with a prince's secrets without leave and against his will is sure to incur his hatred, and then, knowing that he is marked and that occasions are sought against him, he lives the life like a stag, a life full of fears and superstitions. Often too it happens that his own servants and domestics, to curry favour with the prince, accuse and overthrow him. For when the displeasure of the prince is manifest, a man shall scarcely have a servant but will betray him, and so he may expect the fate of Actium. This interpretation of the myth of Actium, with its central theme of secrecy, represents a textual commentary on the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth and the life of the hidden individual who commissioned the painting, wherein he is transmuted into the form of a stag, who lived much of his life in fear as a concealed bastard child of its royal sitter, a marked man hunted like Actium by those who knew of his royal status. Let us then return to the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth, in which it appears that the stag is being crowned with pansies, her favourite flower, by her royal hand. Who does the figure of the stag represent? Who is this invisible person transmuted into the figure of a weeping stag? It is Francis Tudor Bacon, the concealed son and heir of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, the heir to the royal crown, whose birth was kept secret by the so-called Virgin Queen. For private and political reasons, throughout her reign, she never officially or publicly recognised him, and thereby denied Francis Tudor his rightful succession. This is why he, Francis Tudor, is transmuted into the weeping stag in the pregnancy portrait, because in truth and reality he was never, as he should have been, actually recognised and crowned Francis I, King of England. In the bottom right-hand corner of the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth is a cartouche which houses a Baconian Shakespeare sonnet, a 14-line poem written in iambic pentameter, set out in 3 stanzas of 4 lines, followed by a rhyming couplet. The sonnet expresses the melancholy and regret of its concealed author and child in the belly of the pregnant Queen Elizabeth. Its first verse reads, "The restless swallow fits my restless mind, in still reviving, still renewing wrongs. Her just complaints of cruelty unkind are all the music that my life prolongs." In Christian symbolism, the swallow represents the dual resurrection and incarnation of Christ, and is a symbol of fertility and maternal instincts associated with the images of the child votive. In folklore, the swallow was used for fertility rituals based on its association with early marriage in life. It also symbolises leaving the past behind to release yourself from the pain you have suffered, which still torments his restless mind in still reviving and renewing wrongs of the past, his concealed birth and denial of his birthright as son and heir to the royal throne of England. The melancholy tears of the weeping stag represent his own silent tears and unknown anguish over the loss of his royal inheritance. All his hope rested in this goodly tree, the Persian tree, underneath which stands the Persian lady, his mother, Queen Elizabeth, whom he took pains to love and care for. But he now knows that it was all in vain, for now, too late, he realises he will forever flounder on the shales or cruel rock of fate, where the kernels, the central most important thing, his status as her son and heir to the royal crown of England and his rightful posterity, will be inherited by others. He has every right to complain as he remains unacknowledged and disinherited, and fears this will be all the fruits this royal tree, his royal mother, Queen Elizabeth, bears and bequeaths him. In the pregnancy portrait of Elizabeth I, David Shakespeare suggests that there may be a hidden meaning in the sonnet in the layout of the text or contained within the words themselves. He states he has not been able to discern any coded message. It is possible that there may be a hidden meaning in the layout of the text, in addition to any that are contained within the words themselves. I have not as yet been able to define any coded message. So, for those with a skill in decoding ciphers, here is a challenge. David Shakespeare is right to suspect the presence of ciphers in the Shakespeare sonnet. Around or not long after the date Bacon commissioned Gerhardt to paint this extraordinary allegorical portrait of his mother, Queen Elizabeth, He began organising and writing the first of the 2 books of the Advancement of Learning in July 1603, which on completion of the second was first published in 1605. In the Advancement, proceeding from a section discussing writings and words, the images of words, hieroglyphics, emblems, poetry and verse, Bacon introduces the subject of ciphers, briefly explaining the art of enciphering and deciphering different forms of writings and texts. In this passage, Francis Bacon refers to his simple and K-cipher systems, which, as we are about to discover, he secretly incorporates into the sonnet in the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth. The simple cipher referred to by Bacon is a substitution cipher based upon the 24-letter Elizabethan alphabet, in which the letter is given a numerical value. So, for instance, Francis is 67 in simple cipher and Tudor is 74. For the purpose of revealing the hidden cipher in the cartouche, I have placed down the left side the number of words in each line and in the right side the number of letters in each line. In the first stanza of the sonnet contained in the cartouche of the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth, its author Bacon, the child she is carrying in the portrait, reveals his true concealed royal identity as the son of Elizabeth Tudor. The first stanza contains a total of 141 letters, Francis Tudor in simple cipher. Stanza number 1 contains 27 words and 141 letters, giving a total of 168, which minus the 1 for the stanza equals 167, a split simple cipher, 167, for Francis Bacon, Francis. The 141 letters in the first stanza, added to the 36 words in the third, 141 plus 36 equals 177, William Shakespeare in simple cipher. The 141 letters in the first stanza, added to the 74 letters in the couplet, gives a total of 215, which minus 3 stanzas and 1 couplet, so 215 minus 4, equals 211, a split simple K-cipher for Francis Bacon, 100, Bacon, 111. The total of words in the second and the third stanza, 30 plus 36 equals 66, a split simple cipher for Bacon, 33, Bacon, 33. In the couplet, the 74 letters minus the 18 words equals 56, Fr. Bacon in simple cipher. The whole Shakespeare sonnet housed in the cartouche of the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth has a total of 111 words, Bacon in K-cipher. Thus, the deciphered message appears clear. The pregnant Queen Elizabeth gave birth to concealed royal son Francis Tudor, known to the world as Francis Bacon, the secret author of the Shakespeare poems and plays. This complex allegorical painting transcends time and simultaneously represents Queen Elizabeth, for those with eyes to see, as the mother of the 2 towering figures of the 1590s, Francis Tudor Bacon and Robert Tudor Devereux, during the period it was painted. And it specifically represents her as pregnant with her first son Francis by Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, from around the time of mid to late 1560 through to his birth on the 22nd of January 1561. The evidence for this explosive historical secret will be revealed and set out in detail in the second part of the pregnancy portrait of Queen Elizabeth.